My name is Christina, and my life had become an endless whirlwind of responsibility and family tension. Every morning before dawn, I would wake up feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders, preparing myself for another day as a marketing manager at a prestigious multinational corporation. I'd kiss my still sleeping husband Dustin's forehead and whisper that I was leaving, only to hear him mumble something unintelligible and roll over deeper into the sheets. With a resigned sigh, I knew it would be hours before he'd even get up to look for temporary work. As I descended the stairs, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee greeted me, along with my mother-in-law Connie, already in her worn bathrobe, giving me that stern look I'd grown accustomed to in my own kitchen. I forced a smile and greeted her, but all I got in return was silence as she poured coffee into her chipped cup. I hurried to take a sip, nearly burning my tongue, before rushing out of the house that felt less like a home with each passing day. The drive to the office was my only peaceful time, my sanctuary where I could organize my thoughts and prepare for the day ahead. At the office, I transformed from the ignored daughter-in-law and undervalued wife into Christina, the respected and admired marketing manager. My colleagues greeted me enthusiastically, my boss trusted my judgment, and I came alive in the world of strategies, campaigns, and numbers. When Bruce, my boss, stopped by my office that morning, he praised my recent campaign performance and hinted at a possible promotion. His words filled me with pride, allowing me to momentarily forget the situation waiting for me at home. I worked tirelessly, often staying late, knowing every extra dollar I earned was essential for maintaining our household. When I returned home, exhausted but satisfied, I encountered the same scene I'd seen countless times before, Dustin watching soccer on the couch while Connie knitted in her favorite chair. Dustin asked about my day without taking his eyes off the TV, and I responded with a brief, same as usual, knowing he wouldn't show any real interest. When I asked if he'd found work, he dismissed my question with his now irritating casualness, saying something would come up eventually. I headed to the kitchen to prepare dinner, knowing if I didn't do it, no one would. As I chopped vegetables and boiled water for pasta, I found myself wondering how we'd ended up here. Dustin and I had met in college, where he'd been charismatic, funny, and full of dreams. I'd fallen completely in love, envisioning a bright future together. We married young and full of hope, both working and sharing expenses at first. But gradually, Dustin started losing jobs, always with plausible excuses that became less convincing over time. He'd blame the recession or claim companies only wanted younger employees, and I, blinded by love and hope, supported him and doubled my efforts at work. When Connie became a widow with only a small pension, we didn't hesitate to invite her into our home. I thought she might help with housework while Dustin looked for work and I maintained my career, but oh, how wrong I was. Connie was a woman embittered by life, and I soon realized she saw me as a threat to her relationship with her son. She made me feel like an outsider in my own home from the very beginning. She would often comment during dinner about how Dustin wasn't eating enough, implying I wasn't feeding him properly. This was despite the fact that I was the one cooking and paying for all the meals. I would bite my tongue, take a deep breath, and change the subject. When I'd ask Dustin about his job search, he'd respond with that once charming, now frustrating carefree smile, saying something would turn up soon. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, but nothing changed. I kept waking up early, working hard all day, coming home to cook, clean, and pay bills, while Dustin occasionally did temporary work and Connie silently criticized my every move. One particularly exhausting night, I sat on the edge of the bathtub, quietly letting my tears fall, wondering how I, once a strong, independent woman, had become the invisible pillar of a family that didn't value me. When I heard Dustin's voice through the door, asking if I was okay, I quickly wiped my tears and forced strength into my voice to tell him I was fine. Opening the door, I saw concern in his face, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of the man I'd fallen in love with. He gently touched my cheek, asking if I was really okay, noting how tired I'd been looking lately. I wanted to scream, to tell him everything I was feeling, the pressure, the loneliness amidst my own family, but instead, I managed a weak smile and blamed it on work, mentioning a big campaign. Dustin nodded without really understanding and returned to his soccer match on the sofa. I stood in the hallway, feeling myself drift further from my dreams and who I used to be with each passing day. Still, I kept going, putting on invisible armor every morning to face the world. At work, I was unstoppable, closing deals, developing innovative strategies, leading my team with unwavering empathy, earning everyone's respect. After a particularly successful presentation, my assistant Aaliyah remarked on my seemingly endless energy. If only she knew, I thought, that this energy came from pure necessity, from survival instinct. Every dollar earned, every promotion gained wasn't just professional ambition, but the responsibility of supporting a slowly sinking household. Weekends brought mixed feelings, gratitude for rest from work's intense rhythm, but being home meant facing my domestic reality. One Sunday, while checking emails on my laptop, Connie suggested I should be home more, saying Dustin missed me and a good wife should be more present. I counted to 10 silently before taking a deep breath and explaining that my work was important for maintaining our comfortable lifestyle. "Money isn't everything, dear," she responded with that condescending tone that made my blood boil, adding that Dustin needed a companion, not a provider. I wanted to scream that without this provider, they'd be on the street while her precious son bounced between temporary jobs and soccer matches, but as always, I swallowed my words and returned to work with just a nod. As time passed, I felt myself fading away. The once bright, dreamy me became a distant memory, replaced by an exhausted, frustrated woman harboring growing resentment. Still, I continued forward, for love, habit, or maybe just inertia, remaining the silent pillar of this dysfunctional family. Each morning, I faced the world with my best smile, hoping things would change, that Dustin would find stable work, that Connie would see me as a devoted daughter-in-law, that my efforts would be recognized and valued. But for now, this was my life, successful marketing manager by day, undervalued wife by night, carrying the weight of the world while my family seemed oblivious to their dependence on me. Day after day, I continued my routine, wondering how long I could endure this situation before something inevitably had to change. That night, I returned home later than usual, exhausted from town's hellish traffic and an unexpected meeting with an important client. Both physically and mentally drained, all I wanted was a hot shower and rest. Opening the front door, I was struck by an unusual silence. Normally at this hour, the TV would be blaring with Dustin's sports programs, but now there was nothing but an unsettling quiet that instantly put me on alert. I called out to Dustin while placing my bag and keys on the entrance table, but received no response. My heels echoed on the wooden floors as I made my way down the hallway, the living room light casting long shadows on the walls. When I entered, I froze at the sight before me, Connie standing in the center of the room, her small but imposing figure with eyes fixed on me, harboring something I'd never seen before, a mix of anger, contempt, and fear. I tried to maintain composure despite the tension in the air as I asked where Dustin was. She didn't answer immediately, and I noticed her hands trembling as she took a step toward me. In a low, threatening voice, she finally said Dustin was out looking for a real job. I frowned in confusion at her tone and the whole situation, asking wasn't that what we'd all been hoping for. Connie let out a chilling, bitter laugh, saying that's what I had wanted with my constant pressure and disappointed looks. Before I could react, she moved with shocking speed for her age, her hands suddenly gripping my throat, her bony fingers digging into my skin with surprising strength. "Get out, you leech," she screamed, her face contorted with rage. I was paralyzed. With shock, unable to believe what was happening, my mother-in-law, who had lived under my roof for years, was physically attacking me. I managed to stammer her name through restricted breath, asking what she was doing. Her usually lifeless, distant eyes now blazed with intensity as she screamed that I was destroying her son, making him feel powerless, constantly pressuring him. She called me a cold-hearted careerist. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I raised my hands to grasp her wrists, finding the strength to break free from her grip. "You're crazy," I coughed out, while she accused me of turning Dustin from a happy man with dreams into a mere shadow. Her words hit me like a slap. Did she really believe that? Did she truly think I was the villain in this story? My voice was still rough from the attack as I tried to reason with her, explaining how I'd worked hard for years to give us all a good life, to give Dustin the chance to pursue his dreams. Lies, she screamed, accusing me of only caring about my career, money, and success, looking down on them as burdens. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, a mix of frustration, pain, and anger. "That's not true," I whispered, telling her I loved them, loved Dustin, that everything I'd done was for everyone. Connie approached again, not touching me this time, but just as threatening. She said, "If I truly loved him, I would recognize him as a man and let him provide for his family, but instead, I had to be the hero, the great Christina saving everyone with her important job." Each word felt like a dagger in my heart as I realized years of resentment and misunderstanding were finally surfacing. I tried to maintain composure as I suggested I should leave, saying we both needed to calm down. "Yes, leave," she spat, telling me to get out and never come back, claiming her son would be happier without me. I felt the ground crumbling beneath my feet, wondering how we'd reached this point, how years of sacrifice and devotion could be so twisted. As I walked out of the house that I had paid $13,000 a month for, the sheer irony struck me. It wasn't just the physical space I was leaving behind, but the years of unreciprocated sacrifices and invisible contributions. My heart ached, but I knew this was the only way to reclaim my life. Before leaving, I turned back one last time to look at Connie, still standing in the living room, her small figure casting a long shadow across the floor. For a moment, I thought I saw doubt flicker in her eyes, but it disappeared so quickly I must have imagined it. I started to say something about Dustin, but stopped. What could I say? How could I explain what had just happened? "Tell him I'm sorry," I whispered, then left, closing the door behind me. The cool night air hit my face, mixing with the tears now flowing freely down my cheeks. I stood on the porch for what felt like hours, trying to process what had just happened. My heart was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and thoughts. Part of me wanted to go back inside, confront Connie, wait for Dustin, and explain everything, but another part, the part that had been quietly growing stronger over the years, told me it was time to leave, time to think of myself for the first time in a long time. As I took one last look at what had been my home, I made my decision. It was time for change, time to rediscover the real Christina, free from the burden of expectations and misunderstandings. I took out my phone to call a taxi, rubbing my still aching throat from Connie's attack while I waited, contemplating my future. One thing was certain, this night marked the end of one chapter in my life and the beginning of an uncertain new one. I wandered the streets that night in a daze, my heart in pieces. The taxi had dropped me off in the city center, and I walked aimlessly, my mind reeling from what had happened at home. The city lights blurred through my tears as I kept asking myself how this had happened. I couldn't believe Connie, Dustin's mother who had lived under my roof for years, had attacked me like this. Her words, "Get out, you leech," kept echoing in my head, and the pain in my throat was a constant reminder of her physical violence. But what hurt most was Dustin's silence. Where was he during all of this? Why hadn't he protected me? Did he really believe, like his mother, that I was the villain in this story? As I walked, I passed by luxury hotels and briefly considered staying at one, but something stopped me. I didn't want to be a victim, didn't want to hide. I needed my own space, somewhere to think and rebuild my life. That's when I remembered an apartment rental ad I'd seen a few days ago in the historic district of the city. Without hesitation, I pulled out my phone and searched for the number. "Hello," I said when someone answered, asking if I could see the apartment right away despite the late hour. There was a moment of silence on the other end before they replied, noting it was unusual but asking if I was okay, saying I sounded distressed. Trying to control my voice, I explained I was in a complicated situation and really needed a place to stay tonight. Perhaps it was the urgency in my voice, or maybe just a moment of kindness from the real estate agent, but they agreed to meet me in 30 minutes. This space, far smaller than the house I had been paying for, already felt more like home. It wasn't the price tag or size that mattered, it was the freedom and respect that came with it. As the agent showed me around, I felt an inexplicable sense of peace wash over me. "I'll take it," I said before we'd even finished the tour. The agent looked surprised, but asked no questions. Within an hour, I had signed the papers and held the keys to my new home. I sat on the empty living room floor with just my bag, finally allowing myself to cry for the first time since leaving the house. I cried for the love I had believed in, for years of unrecognized effort, for the family I thought I had built. But even through my tears, I felt something else growing inside me, a resolution that I would never be a victim again, never let anyone undervalue or mistreat me. "It's over," I declared to the empty walls, my voice echoing. "No more unappreciated sacrifices, no more unrequited love." That night, I slept on the floor using my coat as a blanket, and despite the physical discomfort, I slept better than I had in years. For the first time in a long time, I didn't have to worry about anyone but myself. The next morning, I woke to the first rays of sunlight streaming through the window, momentarily disoriented before the previous night's events came flooding back. I stretched my aching muscles and walked to the window, watching the neighborhood come alive as shopkeepers opened their stores and residents headed out for fresh bread. In that moment, I made another decision. I wouldn't tell anyone about my financial situation or reveal that I had been supporting the household all these years. If Dustin truly cared for me, truly loved me, he would have to prove it without money as a motivation. "It's time to think about myself," I said to my reflection in the window, seeing a strong, capable woman who had been undervalued for far too long. The following days became a whirlwind of work and free time, consumed with furnishing and decorating my new apartment. Each piece of furniture I chose, every detail I added, became a declaration of my newfound independence. I bought a large, comfortable bed just for me, an elegant sofa where I could relax without anyone's criticism, and a dining table where I could work or eat in peace without contemptuous comments or family tension. My phone wouldn't stop ringing as Dustin called constantly, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails begging me to come home, saying we could fix this, that he loved me, and needed me. Each message felt like a dagger in my heart, but I stood firm. If he truly loved me and valued me, he needed to show it through actions, not just beautiful words. At work, I threw myself into my projects with renewed passion. My colleagues noticed the change, with my assistant Aaliyah commenting one day that I seemed different, more free somehow. I smiled at her, with a mixture of sadness and liberation, confirming that things had indeed changed and I was in the process of rediscovering myself. As days turned into weeks, my new apartment in town gradually became my sanctuary. I decorated the walls with art that Connie would have considered too modern and filled the bookshelves with all the books I'd never had time to read. In the evenings, after work, I explored my new neighborhood's cobblestone streets, discovering small cafes and charming shops. Sometimes I'd sit at a terrace, enjoying a glass of wine while watching people pass by, feeling at peace with myself for the first time in ages. Yet despite my new life and independence, there were moments when loneliness hit hard. Despite all the problems, I found myself missing the familiarity of my old life, questioning if I'd made the right decision. But whenever doubt crept in, I remembered the contempt in Connie's eyes, and the years of unrecognized effort, and my resolve strengthened. I deserve more than this, I would tell myself every morning in front of the mirror. I deserve respect, love, and gratitude, I reminded myself. Day by day, week by week, I built my new life in this town, naively hoping that Dustin would finally understand, see my worth beyond the money I provided, and that our once shared love would prove strong enough to survive this trial. 3 weeks had passed since that fateful night when I left my old life behind, and time seemed to flow differently in my new home. Each day was a mixture of routine and discovery as I threw myself into work with new enthusiasm, despite the lingering pain and newfound sense of liberation. The office became my sanctuary, a place where I could be myself, without the shadows of my past. My colleagues noticed the change in me, though few asked directly about it. One afternoon, after a particularly successful meeting, Bruce, my boss, asked if I was okay, noting that I seemed different these past few weeks. I gave him a mysterious smile and told him I was going through changes, but assured him it wouldn't affect my work. He nodded with a mixture of curiosity and respect, saying whatever it was, it seemed to be working as my recent proposals were excellent. His words filled me with a satisfaction I hadn't felt in a long time, reminding me that my worth was more than just being the unappreciated financial support for my family. Outside of work, my days were filled with small discoveries as this district, with its narrow streets and historic buildings, became my new world. Every corner seemed to hold a secret, a story waiting to be discovered. One afternoon, while walking through the town square, I stopped in front of a small bookstore, my eye caught by a book in the window, Personal Renewal, Rebuilding After Crisis. Without hesitation, I went in and bought it. That night, as I sat on my new sofa drinking hot tea and reading, it felt as if the author knew my story, as if the words were speaking directly to me. When I read the line, "Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find yourself," quiet tears rolled down my cheeks as I thought about what I had lost and what I was gaining in this process. But it wasn't all peace and self-discovery. The ghosts of my old life haunted me in the form of missed calls and voicemails. Dustin kept trying to contact me, leaving messages begging me to come home, saying he didn't understand what happened, that his mother was devastated and claiming there had been a misunderstanding, that they needed me, that he needed me. Each message felt like a dagger in my heart. Part of me wanted to respond, to explain everything, to scream out how I'd felt all these years. But another part, the part learning its own worth, reminded me that I was worth more than being the invisible pillar of an unappreciated family. I decided to keep my new addresses secret. I wasn't ready to face them until I was sure about myself and the future I wanted. At work, I focused on a major project that could lead to an important promotion. Spending long hours at the office, perfecting every detail, was easier than facing the silence of my apartment and the thoughts that came with the night. One late afternoon, as I was leaving the office, I met Aaliyah in the elevator. She hesitantly asked if she could ask me a personal question, and I nodded, bracing myself for what was coming. Then she asked if I had left my husband. The question caught me off guard, as I hadn't realized how apparent my life changes were to others. After a moment, I told Aaliyah it was complicated and that I was taking time for myself. She looked at me with understanding and admiration, telling me that since living alone, I seemed stronger and more confident. Her words touched me more deeply than I expected. They were true. I did feel stronger and more like myself. I thanked her sincerely, reflecting that sometimes distance helps us see things more clearly. That night in my apartment, I pondered our conversation, wondering if I really appeared stronger and more confident. Looking in the mirror, I saw my true self for the first time in weeks, a woman who had found the courage to leave everything behind and rebuild her life piece by piece. There was pain in my eyes, but also determination and hope. Checking my phone, I saw 23 missed calls and 15 voicemails from Dustin that day alone. My finger hovered over the call button in a moment of weakness, but then I remembered that night, the contempt in Connie's eyes and years of being undervalued. I blocked Dustin's number, knowing it was a drastic step but a necessary one. I needed space to heal and rediscover myself, free from the pressure of his constant calls and messages. The nights that followed were difficult, with the apartment's silence feeling amplified. Despite all the problems, I found myself missing the familiarity of my old life, almost convincing myself to go back and fix things. But every morning, waking up in my new bed, in my new home, I felt a spark of hope and freedom. That spark grew stronger with each small success and moment of peace. I established new routines, Saturday mornings at the local market filling my kitchen with fresh produce. Lazy Sunday mornings followed by hours at cafes reading or simply watching life go by. My dedication at work started paying off too. One Friday afternoon, Bruce called me to his office to tell me our new project proposal had been approved. The client was thrilled, and he wanted me to lead the team. Pride and satisfaction welled up inside me. This was the result of my own effort and talent, a success I didn't need to share with anyone. I thanked Bruce with a genuine smile, promising to live up to expectations. That night, I decided to celebrate by wearing my elegant new black dress, one Connie would have deemed too bold, and dining alone at a restaurant I'd always wanted to try. Over dinner, I reflected on the past 3 weeks. They had been challenging but transformative. I was rediscovering parts of myself I'd forgotten, dreams that had been buried under years of responsibility and others' expectations. To you, Christina, I quietly toasted, raising my glass, to your rebirth. As night fell over the city, I felt truly at peace with myself for the first time in ages. The future was uncertain, but no longer frightening. I was ready to face whatever came my way as the strong, independent woman I'd always been deep inside. The next morning, I was awakened by my phone ringing. It was Aaliyah from the office, her voice distressed. She apologized for calling so early on a Saturday but explained there was an emergency with the project. The client wanted an urgent meeting Monday and we needed to rebuild the presentation from scratch. I felt adrenaline course through my veins. This was the most important project I'd handled in years, and I was the team leader. I told her I'd be at the office within an hour, already getting out of bed. As I showered and dressed, my mind was racing. This project could prove my worth to the company and lead to a crucial promotion. At the office, my small but dedicated team was waiting. Aaliyah had gathered the key members: Caleb the data analyst, Brianna the graphic designer, and Zachary the marketing strategist. Taking my place at the head of the conference table, I told them we had 48 hours to create a presentation that would wow the client, and we needed to get started. The following hours were a whirlwind of activity. We reviewed data, created graphs, rewrote proposals, working nonstop with an endless supply of coffee. Near midnight, though everyone was exhausted, we were satisfied with our progress, and I sent the team home to rest until 9 a.m. the next day. Alone in the office, I stood watching the city lights through the window. A wave of nostalgia hit me. I used to call Dustin to tell him I'd be working late. Now there was no one waiting at home. I shook my head to clear these thoughts. This was the new, independent Christina who needed no one's approval. Sunday passed in much the same way, with only brief breaks for meals and light exercise. As the presentation took shape, my confidence grew. This was my element, where I truly shined. By Monday morning, we were ready. The presentation was perfect, every detail meticulously planned. Standing before the bathroom mirror, adjusting my suit and reviewing key points in my head, I told myself I could do this, that I'd worked for this. The client meeting was tense. I delivered the presentation with passion and conviction, confidently answering each question. When it ended, there was a moment of silence that felt eternal. Finally, the CEO, known for being tough in business, smiled and told me it was excellent, that I'd exceeded their expectations. Leaving the conference room, excited, I found my team waiting eagerly for the results. I announced with a smile that the client was thrilled, and celebrations immediately began. During the celebration, I saw Bruce approaching with a broad smile, asking me to come to his office. Inside, he got straight to the point. My performance on this project had been outstanding, and the client was considering significantly expanding their investment. My heart raced as I thanked him, giving credit to the team. Bruce continued, saying I'd led the team brilliantly and wanted to offer me a promotion to Strategic Project Director, with my own team, a substantial raise, and direct reporting to him. I was momentarily speechless. This was what I'd worked and dreamed of for years. I managed to say yes, and Bruce smiled, telling me I'd earned it and deserved it more than anyone. Leaving Bruce's office, I felt as if I was floating. All the stress, sleepless nights, and effort had finally paid off. That night in my apartment, I reflected on how quickly my life had changed. Just weeks ago, I was trapped and undervalued, but now I was at the peak of my career, respected and appreciated. For a moment, I was tempted to call Dustin and share this success, but I stopped myself. This victory was mine alone. As the initial excitement faded, I felt a strange mix of emotions, pride in my success, but also loneliness. I'd worked so hard to reach this point, but who could I share it with? Then my phone rang with a message from Aaliyah, congratulating me and saying I deserved this more than anyone. I smiled, feeling grateful for my team and the people who'd supported me on this journey. I felt a peace and sense of achievement I hadn't experienced in years. I'd proven my worth not just to others, but to myself. That's when I realized this place, initially meant to be temporary shelter, had become my home, a space where I could be myself, without pretense or others' expectations. I sat on my sofa, enjoying the quiet solitude. The next day would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight I simply enjoyed this moment, proud of the woman I'd become. Looking around my apartment, I noticed all the small details that made it mine, the books I'd always wanted to read, the plants I'd started growing, the art on the walls reflecting my taste alone. As I prepared for bed, I realized I was at a turning point. I'd not only achieved the professional success I'd always dreamed of, but also discovered an inner strength I didn't know I had. The future was uncertain, whether I'd return to Dustin, rebuild our relationship on stronger foundations, or if my relationship with Connie would ever truly heal. But one thing was certain, I would never lose myself again. I lay in bed, tired but satisfied. The next day would be my first day as Strategic Project Director, the beginning of a new chapter in both my professional and personal life. Ready, Christina? I asked myself as I closed my eyes, ready for whatever comes. And with that certainty, I fell asleep, ready to face a new day, a new Christina, and all the possibilities the future might bring. The cafe near City Hall was bustling when I arrived 5 minutes before 11. I chose a terrace table with a view of the square and the dignified City Hall building. While waiting, my heart pounded as I fidgeted nervously with my coffee cup. At 11 sharp, I saw them arrive. Dustin was slowly supporting Connie's arm as they walked. They both looked years older, though only weeks had passed. Dustin was thin, his face haggard, his beard unkempt. Connie walked with hunched shoulders as if carrying the weight of the world. I stood up as they approached the table. Unsure how to greet them, I simply nodded, hesitating between a hug or handshake. Dustin's voice trembled with emotion as he thanked me for coming. When Connie, tears in her eyes, started to speak, I raised my hand to stop her, suggesting we sit down first. We sat in silence, heavy with unspoken emotions, while the waiter took our coffee orders. Finally, taking a deep breath, I told them I'd been thinking about everything that had happened, trying to understand how we got here. Dustin nodded, staring into his coffee cup, saying he'd thought of nothing else since I left. Connie's voice shook as she admitted her foolishness, saying she'd been a proud old fool who hadn't seen all I'd done and sacrificed. "Do you realize," I asked, my voice trembling, "that I was paying $13,000 a month to live in that house, and yet I was the one thrown out like I didn't belong? Can you even imagine how that felt?" Dustin looked into my eyes, saying he understood and that sorry wasn't enough. Connie reached across the table toward my hand, but stopped midway, apologizing for that night, her cruel words, and her attack. Through tears, I asked why she had hated me so much. She lowered her eyes shamefully, explaining she hadn't hated me but had been afraid of losing her son, of being left with nothing, of feeling outdated next to my important job and independence. Her words surprised me. I'd never considered how my presence had affected her, how threatened she might have felt. Dustin continued, calling himself a coward who had relied too heavily on me, while wallowing in self-pity, failing to protect me or recognize my worth. Their confessions and apologies broke something in me, and years of suppressed emotions came flooding out. Through tears, I asked if they understood how lonely I'd felt, working all day only to come home to more work and criticism instead of gratitude. When Dustin reached for my hand, I pulled back as he acknowledged their treatment of me, and begged for a chance to make things right. Looking at the genuine regret in their eyes, part of me wanted to forgive them and return to my family. But another part, stronger after weeks of independence, warned me to be careful. "Things can't go back to how they were," I finally said. "I won't be the sole support of this family again." Dustin nodded quickly, saying he was really looking for work and wouldn't stop until he found something stable. Connie added that she would show more consideration and gratitude, proving how much she valued me if given the chance. I felt a mix of hope and caution. I wanted to believe them, to think things could be different, but knew real change would take time and effort. Looking them both in the eyes, I explained how I'd lost myself trying to be the perfect wife these past years, but during these weeks apart, I'd rediscovered who I was and what I wanted. When Dustin quietly asked what I wanted, I took a deep breath. I told them I wanted to be valued as a person, not just for what I provided. I needed an equal partner to share responsibilities and a family that supported and respected me. I could see my words sinking in, the reality of what I was asking settling over them. Dustin declared with determination that he could be that man, the partner I needed. Connie, tears on her cheeks, said she could be the family I deserved if given the chance to prove it. Their sincerity softened my heart, but I knew I couldn't rush into decisions. I told them I needed time to think and be sure of what I wanted. Though disappointed, they nodded, and I continued, saying I was willing to try rebuilding our relationship and family, but under different terms. Dustin eagerly promised to do whatever was necessary. Walking back to my apartment, I reflected on our conversation, painful but cleansing. For the first time in years, I felt Dustin and Connie had truly seen me and understood my perspective. I knew we had a long road ahead. Broken trust doesn't mend overnight, and old habits die hard. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. That night, watching city lights from my balcony, I made my decision. I would give Dustin and Connie, our family, a chance, but on my terms. Never again would I be the invisible Christina carrying everything without recognition. This time, I would be the strong, confident woman I discovered during these weeks of independence. The future was uncertain, but for once I was excited about what it might bring. The days following our meeting were a whirlwind of emotions and reflection. I'd agreed to give them a chance to rebuild our family, knowing it wouldn't be an easy journey. Every morning in my apartment, I reminded myself things would be different this time. I would set the rules. I decided to proceed cautiously, arranging regular meetings with Dustin and Connie in public places before gradually moving to more private settings. Our first reunion was in the city gardens, where Dustin arrived on time with my favorite flowers. The gesture touched me, though it reminded me how often I'd forgiven months of neglect for small kindnesses. We walked through the park, starting with small talk about weather and work before our conversation deepened. Sitting on a bench facing the City of Arts and Sciences, Dustin said he'd been thinking about what I'd said about being valued as a person, not just a provider. I felt my throat tighten as I described feeling invisible in my own home, valued only for my paycheck and housework. Dustin, teary-eyed, apologized for being lost in self-pity and failing to see how he'd hurt me, saying he'd always respected my strength and intelligence, but hadn't known how to show it. His words moved me, but also sparked anger. I demanded to know why he hadn't expressed this respect, why he'd let his mother treat me that way, why he hadn't protected me. Shamefully, he admitted being a coward, afraid to disappoint his mother, now realizing he'd disappointed me instead. We talked for hours, confronting old wounds and uncomfortable truths. At day's end, Dustin took my hand, promising to become the partner I deserved. I squeezed his hand before letting go, telling him I needed actions, not words. The meetings with Connie followed, initially tense with years of resentment. Gradually, as we opened up, understanding grew between us. Connie admitted her cruelty came from fear of losing her place in the family, of becoming useless. Her words lifted a weight from my shoulders. While past pain remained, it opened a door to a different future. Meanwhile, my career flourished, with Bruce praising my successful projects and satisfied clients. They were expanding the project and wanted me to lead it, filling me with pride in my achievements. Best of all, I could finally celebrate my success openly, without worrying about hurting Dustin's pride. As weeks passed, I saw real changes in both Dustin and Connie. Dustin found stable work at a renewable energy company, less than my salary, but he seemed genuinely passionate about making a difference. Connie started taking art classes, something she'd always wanted to try but never dared. She joked about being too nervous to hold a brush on her first day, but now felt she'd found something just for herself. Watching them grow and find their paths brought mixed feelings, joy tinged with sadness at the time we'd lost. After 2 months of meetings, I agreed to dinner at our old house. Walking in felt surreal, everything looked the same yet different. The first change I noticed was my favorite artwork, which Connie had always criticized, now prominently displayed in the living room. Dustin explained they wanted me to feel it was my home too, showing they valued my taste and style. Dinner was pleasant, filled with genuine conversation and laughter. Later, over coffee on the terrace, Dustin asked if I'd considered coming home. My heart raced. Part of me missed the familiarity, but my stronger, wiser self urged caution. I carefully explained that while I appreciated their changes, I needed more time. Dustin smiled understandingly, and Connie agreed, saying what mattered was that we were on the right path. Walking back to my apartment that night, I reflected on our progress. The old Christina would have rushed back for peace's sake, but I'd learned to value myself, set boundaries, and demand the respect and love I deserved. I knew if our family deserved a second chance, it had to be built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. Getting ready for bed, I looked around my apartment, this sanctuary that had sheltered me through my hardest times. I knew someday, I'd leave and return to Dustin and Connie, but not today or tomorrow. That time would come only when I was certain their changes were permanent, when I felt truly valued as a person, not just for what I could provide. As I drifted off to sleep, I smiled, seeing a bright future full of possibilities for the first time in years. Whatever that future might bring, I will be able to face it as the strong, independent woman I'd become.